Tiombe alcoholic. I'm clean and sober by the grace and miracle of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I want to thank RJ for asking me to come out here and share my experience, strength, and hope. And so I just want to thank a few people for this amazing experience that I've had since yesterday, and I feel like I've been out here all week. And so thank you for the gentleman recording, and if I don't do a good job, don't post it. But I really want to thank, I feel like I'm in the middle of this tribe out here, and they're like all right here. You know, we got Alexia, we got Trey, we got David, we got Caleb, we got Nicole, we got Amanda, we got Daniel, you know, and then Norma's back there. You know, like, these are people in the last 48 hours I have spent time with, and went by, you know, Jen's house, and like, just the love that I received here in Utah just made me feel so comfortable. So I just want to tell you thank you. You know, I appreciate you guys. So there's three things that are vital to my recovery, and that's a sobriety date. My sobriety date is June 27th, 1995. So, you know, I have over 30 years of sobriety. I have a home group, and it's called Principal Studies Group. It's a 3 legacy group, and we study the steps, the traditions, and the concepts every Wednesday night at 5:45 p.m. So if you ever find yourself in Modesto, please come out, and it's also hybrid. So if you're interested in the information, I'll be glad to share it with you. And then I have a sponsor, and her name is Jane, and she's out of Florida, and we have a standing appointment every Sunday morning at 10:30, and then when my Steelers are playing, I go to the standing appointment at 6 a.m. on Sundays. So those 3 things are vital for permanent recovery. And the other thing that I do is I have a service position. I'm currently the GSR at my home group, and I also sponsor other women, and the requirement for these women to work with me is that they need to go through the steps and the traditions and the concepts, and then they also need to turn around and sponsor another woman. So those are requirements that I bestow, and because that's something that my sponsor also does. So, okay, now that I got all that out of the way. You know, I just need to tell you that when I got the phone call to go to Utah, I was thinking to myself, are there black people in Utah? You know? So I'm so happy to see you guys. Okay, sis. You know, because I was like, I don't know. Like, I'm not sure if these folks in Utah are going to be able to handle all of this, you know. But so, you know, so I'm glad I'm here, you know, and wherever I go, I take me with me, right? So, you know, the first thing is I'm an alcoholic, and for me, the second thing is I am a black woman. You know, we do talk about, you know, there's not outside issues, and so what I have been taught in Alcoholics Anonymous is that an outside issue is if it's past your nose. And it is an inside issue if it's within your nose. So when it comes to race, when it comes to sexuality, that is all an inside issue, you know. And so I don't know why, I just felt like I needed to say that. But anyway, so let me just get to the literature. So I was taught that, you know, when I got sober, my sponsor had told me, you're going to study this literature, because this is the design for living that works. So I always like to start with something that is very pressing for me, and so here it goes. But it is from our twisted relations with family, friends, and society at large that many of us have suffered the most. The primary fact that we fail to recognize is our total inability to form a true partnership with another human being. Our egomania digs to 2 disastrous pitfalls. Either we insist upon dominating the people we know, or we depend upon them far too much. If we lean too heavily on people, they will sooner or later fail us, for they are human too and cannot possibly meet our incessant demands. In this way, our insecurity grows and festers. When we habitually try to manipulate others to our own willful desires, they revolt and resist us heavily. Then we develop hurt feelings, a sense of persecution, and a desire to retaliate. As we redouble our efforts at control and continue to fail, our suffering becomes acute and constant. We have not once sought to be one in a family, to be a friend amongst friends, to be a worker among workers, to be a useful member of society. Always we tried to struggle to the top of the heap or hide underneath it. This self-centered behavior blocked a partnership relation with any one of those about us. Of true brotherhood, we had small comprehension. And so my very first twisted relationships was with my family, and it was with my biological mother. And when I was about 5.5, 6 years old, my mother told me she was going to the store and to make sure I wouldn't open the door for anyone else and to wait until my father came home. And that was the last time that I saw her. So I come from abandonment, and my mother is from Japan and my father is from Watts, a little town inside of Los Angeles. So I'm gonna let you do the military math. And growing up in San Jose, I'm born and raised in San Jose. I grew up on the east side. Okay, there's somebody who identifies, all right. And so, here I was navigating, being a mixed little girl. And, my dad ended up having me go to parochial school, which was Catholic turned private. And he had a motorcycle, and he would take me to school on his motorcycle, and all of the other kids had their parents had cars, and so here my dad would be showing up on his Nighthawk 650 in his chaps, dropping me off, and I felt odd, right? I went to school with all white people. I was called an N-word daily, and I didn't even know what the N-word was. And I remember going home and asking my dad, what is the N-word? And my dad said, that's not you. Don't listen to what people have to say. Just focus on your studies. And so I did. And so my dad, we would have these mother-daughter days at the school where we would learn how to macrame. And my dad would show up in his chaps learning how to do this. And I was always so embarrassed, right? Everybody had their moms there. And then people would always ask, Tiombe, where's your mom? And I can't just say, she went to Thrifty's and she got lost on aisle 20. I can't, you know what I mean? Why would I say that to someone? So I just said, my mother's dead. And it was at that time in my life, I learned how to keep people at bay. And my father raised me in the sense of, what goes on in this house stays in this house. And I was an only child. So I had, a dog, we had Dobermans, and, I had a little family of snails that I used to play with. So I had I was full on the kid that had all this imagination, right? And so when I was about 7 years old, my dad used to have, I'm really aging myself, a lot of, God bless Trey. His little tail all weekend. He was like, Tiombe, you don't look that old, And I'm like, yes, I'm in full-blown menopause and I wear glasses now, So I got sober young. I got sober at the age of 21 and I'm 52 now. So, it was funny because growing up, my dad would have the heavyweight fights would come on. And my dad had this Zenith TV, if you guys remember Zenith. So my dad had this Zenith TV, and, he would invite his buddies over, and they would watch Sugar Ray Leonard, And I was this nosy kid. I always wanted to know what was going on, who was doing what, and I was always in everybody's business. And so I would come out of the room and my dad would be like, you need to go back inside. Get your tail back inside of your room. This is grown folks out here. This is grown folks' business. You need to stay in there. And, but I kept coming out. And they had these red and white cans. And my dad's friends were had these big belly laughs, And so one night my dad, Sugar Ray Leonard, was fighting and stuff. And he had the fight on, and my dad was like, you want to keep coming in here? Then you need to clean up. Grab a tray and you clean up. So I started cleaning up all of the Budweiser cans. And I got into the kitchen, and then I took a sip, and it was nasty, but it was warm. And I was like, oh, this makes them laugh. And so I equated alcohol with laughter. And so by the time I was 12 years old, I was going to this parochial school. I was one of like 3 people of color that went to this school. And so, we used to listen to Metallica and Motley Crue and Duran Duran. My favorite song was Am I Evil, by Metallica. And so I used to be, yeah, am I evil? Yes, I am, and all of that stuff, because the lyrics talk about being a motherless child, so that was like, they're talking to me. And, and I loved Motley Crue because I always wanted to smoke in the boys' room, and I was always trying to be up against the boys and all of that. And I swear to God, Tommy Lee is 63 years old and he can still get it. I follow him on Twitter, so anyway. Anyway. I love me some Tommy Lee. I was supposed to marry him, but anyway. Sorry. Anywho, okay, so what ended up happening for me was I was 12 years old and my friend had a purple mohawk. Her name was Alyssa. And, I was a latchkey kid, right? And so, my dad worked 2 jobs and, and then her mom would give me a ride home from the parochial school. And so one day her mom couldn't take us, so we took the bus home. And, the school was hella far. And so when we got there, Alyssa was talking about oh my God, Tiombe, you got to see what I got. And I was like, dude, what do you have? And she's pulls out a pack of Marlboro Reds and a 4-pack of Bartles and James that was in her backpack. And I was like, oh, I don't know. I don't know. And she's like, oh, come on, Tiombe. So we lit up a cigarette. I hit the cigarette. I choked. I got lightheaded and I threw up. And I was like, damn, I need another one, And so she was like, let's top it off with this. And so she topped it off. And so we're drinking the Bartles and James. And you know what I mean? And it was I heard the speaker one time talk about how her shoulders came off of her ears. And she was finally able to relax. And that's what I identify that moment for me was, having the cigarette and having the booze. And it was now all of this anxiety I had been feeling and all of this abandonment and rejection, it all fell by the wayside. And so at the age of 12, I became that person. And I like to sum it up like this. I take a drink, the drink takes a drink, and then the drink takes me. And who knows where I'm going to end up. We had this, so my dad ended up taking me out of the parochial school, and then so I ended up in public school. In public school, we had our own daycare at our high school, and the daycare was for the young ladies in the school that were having children. And it was mandatory for them to take a parenting class, and then all ladies had to take home ec, right? The patriarchy. And so it was all of the stuff, right? So, it was really a lean on me type of school. Everybody came to our school to fight. Everybody came to our school to stab and shoot. And we were the first high school in Santa Clara County to get San Jose PD as their precinct on the campus. So now, mind you, I come from going and listening to Duran Duran, and then everybody is listening to NWA, right? It was so polarized for me. And so I get to the school and I'm like, oh my God, I'm so happy to be here. I don't have to wear a uniform anymore. And let me tell you, it was all black and brown. And they were like, girl, where you been? Because aren't you just this little white girl, And so, and then fun fact, my maiden name is White. So they got it right, And so what ended up happening was, in high school, I became a daily drinker, and it became where I was always trying to reach outside of myself to fix something inside, right? And then it was, I found the stoners, and I found who I clicked with. And I'm also one of those people that I can become a chameleon. And with my drinking, I become a chameleon. So because whatever I do, I can never be enough, have enough, or do enough, right? And so, with my alcoholism, alcohol gave me the ability to be whatever you wanted me to be so I can find the validation. So when I hung out with the stoners, I was smoking and I was doing a whole bunch of stuff with them and, all right, dude, rock on, and then, my godmother would braid my hair and then, and I had my little bamboo earrings on. Okay, girl, I was struggling with identity, right? So during this time, I was either too black or I wasn't black enough. I had no way of connecting, and I found the way that I connected was through alcohol. So all through high school, I drank, and I would skip class, and we had these open market, liquor store across from our high school, and you would pull up, and the attendant would come out, and then, they would come and they would serve whatever they wanted, Cheetos or whatever, or a drink or whatever. And we would skip class and then we would go to the back of that open air market and then we would boost a bunch of booze and then we would go to the park. And so we would drink at the park and then there was those merry-go-rounds that you can spin on. And so what we would do was, we would get drunk and then we would spin each other and whoever threw up the fastest has to go boost the next bottle. So I got really good at boosting, because I was always the first one, and I was okay because, I wasn't a track star, but, I could move kind of fast, gravity didn't hit and I'm older now, so I ain't trying to run. And so, that's what my high school was like. And by the time I graduated high school, in my senior year, the principal had to talk to my dad and told my dad, if you want her to get her diploma, she has to take 3 night classes in order to get her diploma. And so I decided, okay, I'm going to get a diploma. And so they offered 2 of the classes there at the school. And then the other class I had to take at San Jose State. So, in my senior year, I not only did, all of my regular classes plus the 2 night classes, and then I was at San Jose State 2 nights a week. And going to San Jose State, I found the Omegas, I found the Kappas, I was all up in them fraternity houses, and I was drinking with them, and then I would wake up and I would be in somebody's closet, sitting in my own vomit. And I was grateful because my pants were still on, you know what I mean? And so what ended up happening was I crossed the stage, and I remember having a flask in my bra when I crossed the stage. And when I came to, I was at LaGuardia Airport in New York. So I am the kind of alcoholic that I don't have the ability to stay in the same state of California, much less state of mind. Here in the book, it talks about when men and women pour so much alcohol into themselves that they destroy their lives, they commit a most unnatural act. Defying their instinctive desire for self-preservation, they seem bent upon self-destruction. They work against their own deepest instincts. As they are humbled by the terrific beating administered by alcohol, the grace of God can enter them and expel their obsession. Here, their powerful instinct to live can cooperate fully with their Creator's desire to give them a new life, for nature and God alike abhor suicide. And so I had to look up the word abhor, and abhor means to be against. And so when I was in New York, I remember sitting at the LaGuardia Airport, and I went to the payphone in the white pages, and, and I had some dealings with, some people in school, and I just call them relations, not necessarily relationships. They were just relations. And with those relations, I would often find myself drunk, and then my ankles would be at my ears. So I ended up when I ended up at LaGuardia Airport, I remembered that this dude that I was dealing with, he was originally from the Bronx. So I found him in the white pages, and I called him Collect, and I was like, oh my God, hey, it's Tiombe. I totally came to visit. And he was like, okay. And so he came and picked me up from the airport, and then here went, my stint in New York in the Bronx, and I was 17 years old. And, I lived with him, and his sister also lived in the house, and it was fun, and we partied. But then I noticed that I was partying way too much compared to what they would party, and he wasn't okay with that. And, oh my God, so I just had this, I talked not too long ago, and this whole story came out, so I guess you guys got to get good with the story too. So, I'm 17 years old. I have no work history, right? And so I'm in New York, and he had a twin brother, and the twin brother had a lot of acne on his back, right? And so he would ask me, Tiombe, can you pop my back for me? And I would say, you got to pay me. You pay me, then I'll pop your back. So I used to get paid to pop his back acne so I could get like a bottle of Thunderbird. You know what I mean? And I would get, and his sister had these little readers, so I put the readers on, and I would just, And so, and I thought, that's a pretty good way to make a living, And so then the more that I got drunk and all these things started happening, dude ended up putting me out. And so, I had 40 cents to my name. And this is when those cat suits were in, those full-on body suits. So I had turned the cat suit backwards so it can be the zipper that was in the back would be in the front, and the girls were still perky, so I would have them out there, And I went into the bodega, which is the liquor store, like a little market. And so I went over there, and I was like, hey, make sure the girls were right. And I was like, hey, can I get a 40 old E, And he goes, how much do you have? And I was like, dude, I got 40 cents. And he was like, you know what? Come to the back with me. I'm 17 years old. I said, okay. And at this point in my life, if you told me this liquor is good, I'm going to try it. I never asked questions, right? You should take this. This will be good. Good. Oh, I'm really good. Good. I didn't care, and so that started my world of trade. So, I'm one of those women that I compromised myself, mind, body, and soul just to get another drink. And, and then I started off on my road of walking the track. And so being out in Jerome Avenue in New York, this is where my alcoholism takes me, right? I remember being out there, and there was a lady out there, and she had a blue teddy, and she was 8 months pregnant. And my thought was, if I get that bad, I'll stop drinking. Tiombe, you're out there with her. It's bad, But no, every single line in the sand, I would say, I'm never going to do that. I would cross it. Well, that wasn't too bad. I'm never going to do that. And it kept seeing all the lines I would put in the sand, I would constantly cross, right? Because again, I'm one of those people that I reach outside of myself to fix something inside. And so what ended up happening was I got caught up with some Jamaicans with some outside issues. And I had to get back to California because they were after me. And so I got back to California, and I ended up in a little town called East Palo Alto. And East Palo Alto was known as the, he knows what it is. Back in the late 80s, early 90s, East Palo Alto was the murder capital of the United States. And they were like a five-mile radius city. And they had the most murders. Back in this time, the East Palo Alto Police Department was shot up by the community. So they no longer have an East Palo Alto Police Department. So I go to East Palo Alto, and I go to this little seedy bar. And, I still got that one little cat suit hanging on. And I'm going to look for him because I'm homeless. And he was 6'3", Hershey Special Dark Chocolate, the way I like him. He had this he had a big old rope and a Cadillac symbol. You guys got to remember, this was a long time ago. so I got hooked up with him, and he was a drug dealer, and and then like my life took off in a whole different direction, and I started transporting and all the other good stuff. And then when he went to prison, I was like, oh, well, now I have like free reign to like be a drug dealer. And I kept passing out, and I kept being in blackouts, and I would forget where I lost the kilos of cocaine and where I hid them. So I didn't make a very good drug dealer. And so I just went back to what I knew, and what I knew was to use my body to get the things that I needed. And so by this time, I was dealing with a cop that was, a crooked cop in San Jose, and he kept telling me, I was living in a crack house, and he kept telling me, Tiombe, you got to get it together. And I'm thinking, dude, where's your wife? Like, you in this crack house with me. What are you talking about? And he was like, no, seriously, like, you need to get a job. You need to, get it together. And so I ended up getting a job as a credit card collector. I've already made those amends. Thank you. And yes, there are statutes of limitations. And so what ended up happening was I ended up getting that job, and the people that I worked with that we shared like a cubicle, they were all in AA. And this one girl, Jackie, she would read this large blue book and then smoke 3 cigarettes in a 10-minute break. And I would ask her, like, what the hell is in that book that stresses you out? Like, and she would be like, what? And I'm like, that book is not big. It's not like Roots where it's hella big. Like, it's, you should be done by now, and she would talk about how it was her design for living. And in a blackout, I ended up at her house, and it was a bunch of young people in Alcoholics Anonymous who decided to do an intervention on me. And they talked about this design for living that worked, and I didn't understand anything that they were saying, but they said, you don't have to live like this anymore. And so they took me to my first meeting, and I had to get a big book, and I had to get a 12 and 12, and one of the ladies there started reading the book out loud to me with a dictionary. And because I didn't have any comprehension skills when I got here, because I was, close to drinking a gallon a day. And so what ended up happening for me was it was a bunch of these young people in Alcoholics Anonymous that would pass me around in meetings, and they would be like, hey, you going to take Tiombe Tuesday through Thursday? Okay, cool. You got her Friday and Saturday, right? Like I got passed around like that. And then, with the young people, they still lived at home. So then they would be like, well, my parents are out of town this weekend, so Tiombe can stay with me, and then, but she got to be gone by Sunday because my mom is coming back, And so, that's what I did. I couch hop, and I went to meetings, and we went to midnight meetings, and then we had to be at the 6 a.m. attitude adjustment meeting, and, just all that stuff. And then, I turned around and I had 30 days. And then I turned around and I had 60 days. And then all of a sudden I had a year, and I have the sponsor that's taking the steps with me. And I look up and I'm being of service. I'm secretarying meetings. I'm on an H&I, I got an H&I commitment, and I'm doing all this stuff. And, I start reading the book to other women, and I'm in the center of the herd. And when I had about 6.5 years, my sponsor went out. And so, when I found out she went out is because I was riding my bike in downtown San Jose, and she was coming in out of a bar, and she was 3 sheets to the wind. And so I went home and I called my friend and I said, what do you do when your sponsor goes out? And she said, write an inventory, meet me at the midnight meeting. So I did, and I met her at the midnight meeting, and then we talked, and she said, Tiombe, you're going to have to get another sponsor. And I was like, well, I don't like half these hoes, so you're just going to have to, you're just going to have to sponsor me, and you can't say no, So that woman ended up sponsoring me for the next 17 years, But then the next Sunday came up, and I was supposed to meet with Rachel. And I was like, aren't I still supposed to meet with Rachel? And so I showed up, and she did too. And she had a hangover. And we did that dance for 2 years until Rachel was ready to get sober. And she called me and she said, Tiombe, I don't want to go out to breakfast today. Can I just come to your house and can I detox? And I said, absolutely, if you're willing to take the steps. And she said, please take me through the steps. So that weekend, I went to Costco. I got a big old bucket of red vines. And we went back home and we studied the book and I took her through the steps. And Rachel just celebrated 21 years of continuous sobriety, you know. So 22, sorry. And so what came alive for me was the responsibility statement, right? We don't leave anyone behind who is willing to get this program, because I am responsible for when anyone, anywhere reaches out for help. I want the hand of AA always to be there, and for that I am responsible. So I didn't want to leave her behind. And so there's so much unconditional love in Alcoholics Anonymous, you know, and so, you know, through those years, you know, and I've been sober more than half my life, right? So like there's so much that I could sit here and tell you, and but I'm trying to make sure that like I respect the time. So what ended up happening was my sponsor Kim, she started to get really sick, and she was an insulin dependent diabetic, and so she started having strokes. She got some toes amputated. She got her, you know, her second foot, you know, the toes amputated, and then she had like heart attacks, and, you know, and it was just becoming a lot. And Kim was the kind of person that I would call her and she would be in the hospital, and then she would be like, I feel like you need to write an inventory and come down here and read it to me, you know? And I was like, oh my God, like, dude, like, you just got that kidney. Are you sure? Like, you need to relax, you know? And she'd be like, no, I need to be of service, you know? And so what I learned from Kim was about my value and finding value in others, right? And, you know, and I'm one of those people that as I have taken the steps and immersed myself within Alcoholics Anonymous, you know, we go through different phases, right? When we learn the literature, and I don't know about you, but when I learned the literature, I wanted to speak it to the high tops. I was so ornery. People would misquote the book, and I would be like, excuse me, I got an announcement, you know? And like, I was just really just wrong, right? And so what ended up happening was, I remember people would talk about medication, and these women would talk about their depression and how they're struggling, and, you know, they needed to get a psychiatrist. And I would sit there and I would be like, well, obviously you don't have a good sponsor. You know, like, I think you should take the steps. And I don't know if you're just like working them off the wall, because that's all you'll get is off the wall sobriety. Like, you actually need to do the steps, you know, and I became full of judgment. And so when I had about 9 years of sobriety, I was ready to eat a bullet. See, what you judge, you become. I started battling with depression. And so I ended up on a 5150 hold at the crisis center, you know. And don't worry, I take medication for your protection today, you know. So, you know, yeah, so I have a therapist, a psychiatrist, a sponsor, and a spiritual advisor. You know, because the book talks about seeking outside help, right? We're not in the business of trying to make friends. Like it's great when we make friends, but we're in the business of saving lives. Like, I was taught, take the steps or die. If you're not willing, our hat is off to you. Please go out and come back. And if you survive, then maybe you'll be willing to take this as the desperate as the drowning, right? So, you know, when I got full of judgment, and then it was like no more, I couldn't be judgmental about anyone, because everybody's path is their path. And whatever works for me may not work for you. That's why they say there's every nut for a screw, or every screw for a nut, however that goes, right? Like, but there's always somebody in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous that you can connect with. So what ended up happening was, I got into this space where, what I like to call checkbox sobriety. Like, I went to that meeting, I 12-stepped that woman, I answered the hotline, I'm being of service, you know, I read this book, oh, I did this, oh, I went to this event, I'm on that committee, oh, I read the book to so-and-so, but I'm so busy doing that I'm not having the experience to be. And so I like to call it The Princess and the Pea. Do you guys remember that old story where she had like 152 mattresses and then like she could feel that pea that's underneath there? Like that's how I felt. And so I had continued to like, okay, Kim is getting sicker. Like there's something wrong. I don't know what it is, but there's something like that's just off. And so what ended up happening was, the last time Kim had a heart attack, she ended up, needing 24-hour care. And so I was going and helping her and all of that. And I was like, you know what? I really need to find another sponsor. So I prayed for another 2 years for me to find another sponsor, because I had 22 years of sobriety, and I'm looking around in my home group and other meetings that I was going to, and I was like, oh no, I'm not asking none of these hoes, right? Like, I was like, I don't know. And so, I started, praying, and I started meditating about it. And 2 years later, I met this woman, and I happened to be a young people speaker. And it was like I met this woman at the conference, and it was like I knew her all my life. It was like she was like put in my path. And so I've been working with that sponsor now for the last 8 years of my sobriety. And so the last 8 years of my sobriety, my world has opened up. And it's opened up in the sense of internally, right? Because what I believe is that if you don't go within, you go without. And so I started having to like go within and like really seek and do something different, because the longer you stay here, the more narrow your road will become. And the more narrow the road becomes, it's because the old behavior that we used to have no longer works, right? And so what ended up happening was, as I'm on this journey with my current sponsor, she was constantly talking about expand your horizon. Expand your horizon. And so how I was expanding my horizon is that I could look at step 11, and instead of like saying it as a prayer, I ask it as a question. Did you bring harmony today? Did you bring love? Are you understanding? Or are you bringing chaos? Right? So all of these things, she started having me do, and it was like, oh my God. And it just felt like things were finally settling down internally. And then I got a phone call. And this gentleman says, he leaves a message. He was like, I'm looking for Tiombe White. My name is Aaron, and I have some information about her biological mother, if you can call me back. This time I'm 47 years old, and so I call him back, and he proceeds to tell me that my mother was dying of cancer and she wanted to meet me. And this was back in 2020. So I said, okay, well, from my understanding, she doesn't want me in her life. So she's more than welcome. You can give her my number and she can call me. And so she ended up calling, and I had a conversation with her. And she said, that was my oldest son that called you. So my mother decided to adopt 2 children. And you could only imagine what that inventory looked like. Like, in no shade for people who adopt or people who are adopted, but in my experience, it was, how the hell could you go and pick up some kids and not even raise your own? And so I started to do more inventory work with that. And my sponsor was like, lead with compassion. The least you could do is leave her with her dignity. And so what started to come up for me was, there's a part in the big book that talks about when we make decisions based on self, which later place you in a position to be hurt, right? And so that sentence became alive for me, because it was like, oh my God, my mother didn't do anything different than what I did when I was actively drinking. Like, she's not an alcoholic, but she has her own trauma. She has her own story. She has her own struggle. And right then and there, in the 12 and 12 and in the 8th step, it talks about the obstacles will melt away. And right there, I was able to see her as another human being that was just doing the best that she could at that time. And she was a young girl. She was young. She was 23 when she had me, And so, so I embarked on this journey of getting to know my mother, and she ended up dying a month after I got married. And so I had to go to, oh yeah, that's right. You know, you take the steps, you can turn a hoe into a housewife. And I needed to break up the sadness there. So anyway, so what ended up happening was, you know, my brothers had called me, and they, you know, when they told me that my mother had passed, they said, can you please come and help us with the funeral? And so I did. I flew to North Carolina, and I went to the funeral, and we tried to put the whole thing together. And I noticed that my brothers, they would ask me to look through pictures, like, because it was like for the slide, you know, and there were no pictures of me. What I was taught in Alcoholics Anonymous is to show up, let go, and be my authentic self. And I had to excuse myself. And my youngest brother was like, are you okay? And I said, no, it kind of hurts that there's no pictures of me. And he said, okay. And he goes, but there's these other pictures. We don't know who's who in these pictures. And they were like pictures from the 60s and the 70s. And I was like, oh yeah, oh, there goes mom right there. And they go, that doesn't look like her. I go, oh yeah, the hip huggers with the cigarette, the no bra, the pink and blue eyeshadow that goes all the way to her temples. Oh yeah, that's her. And they look and they go, what? I was like, oh yeah. Yeah, I got the mom who was being called by the streets. You got the PTA Christian mom, you know. And because they're 18 years younger than me. You know what I mean? Like they could be my kid, you know. And so, but I sat there, and all of the things that I wanted to tell them, I did not tell them. Because what I realized was that twisted relationship, even though that was a twisted relationship with me, I'm so happy she had the ability to adopt 2 children that needed a home, and she gave them a home full of love. That's Alcoholics Anonymous, that allows me to see it from that perspective. You know what I mean? And so, you know, with that funeral, people didn't know she had a daughter. I was like, you know, like, it was re-traumatizing from what my childhood was. And I remember my first sponsor used to say, everything that you experience drunk, you'll experience sober, so then you can actually make a different decision. And so what I did was I sat with that uncomfortable feeling. My current sponsor always talks about get comfortable with being uncomfortable, because that's where we grow. And if we don't grow here in Alcoholics Anonymous, we go. And we may not make it back. So what ended up happening was, you know, I came back to California, and, you know, I was having a lot of, you know, issues and challenges, and I got to a place where I no longer wanted to have that God, right? Because, like, why would God put me in this space to have these experiences again? Like, I can't serve that type of God. And so here in the book, oh wait, I feel like you guys should break your bindings so you can like get confused where the pages are. Okay. It says, finally, we begin to see that all people, including ourselves to some extent, emotionally ill as well as frequently wrong. Then we approach true tolerance and see what real love for our fellows actually means. It will become more and more evident that as we go forward, that it is pointless to become angry or to get hurt by people who, like us, are suffering from the pains of growing up. So all of the things that I had experienced at the funeral, it wasn't about her. It is about me. And what can I change in me that would allow me to interact with the world on a much better space, right? And so, you know, I'm being mad, and I'm like, you know, I don't want to pray to God, you know, this God sucks, you know, and my sponsor's like, choose something else. So I started seeking, right? And the more I started seeking, the things that started, you know, I started to see the things that I loved. And the things that I loved are like, I love big redwood trees, and I love to be in nature, and I love like to hear the babbling brooks and the rivers, and and so I started to go up to the Santa Cruz Mountains to a Buddhist temple, and and you get to see the monks walk through, and they just look all just peaceful, and I was like, this is where I need to be. And so the more that I continue to seek, in Modesto, we finally started a secular meeting. And so because I got to a space where, having long-term sobriety and not having a higher power, I was like, what is this supposed to look like, right? So I ended up going to this secular meeting, and one of my friends gave me this book, and it's an AA conference-approved literature. It's one big tent. It's atheist and agnostic AA members share their experience, strength, and hope. So I'm gonna read from this, because this is currently where I'm at. So it says, newcomers are approaching AA at the rate often of thousands yearly. They represent almost every belief and attitude imaginable. We have atheist agnostics. We have people in nearly every race, culture, and religion. In AA, we are supposed to be bound together in this kinship of a common suffering. Consequently, the full individual liberty to practice any creed or principle or therapy, whatever, should be a first consideration for us all. Let us not, therefore, pressure anyone with our individual or even collective views. Let us instead accord each of the respect and the love that is due to every human being as he tries to make his way toward the light. Let us always try to be inclusive rather than exclusive. Let us remember that each alcoholic among us is a member of AA so long as he or she so declares. And that was written by Bill W. in the Grapevine, July 1965. And so what started to happen for me was, as I started back on this, journey with the steps, what came up for me was this. I have found through my own experience, that observation of others, that it doesn't matter what I believe, it's what I do that counts. AA provides the basis for learning what to do. And so, for me, like in the last 8 years of my sobriety, I have been looking at the intent behind the steps rather than looking at the ritual, right? Because I can pray with the best of them. My grandfather was a Southern Baptist minister, you know what I mean? And I know how to work a rosary, so I know how to pray to a saint. I know how to do all of that. But the key is, was I having the experience? So looking at the intent behind all of the 12 steps, what happens for me is that I'm actually being present in the moment and having the experience of making those amends, of holding my tongue. In the 12 and 12, it talks about restraint of tongue and pen. And in my 12 and 12, I wrote and fist, because I didn't start going to jail until after I got sober, because I was full of feelings and did not know how to communicate my feelings, that I thought it was okay for me to put my hands on people. And it was the people in Alcoholics Anonymous at my home group that would be like, Tiombe, it is not okay for you to put your hands on people. Like, I'm that person that was like psychotic in the parking lot, and I tried to run over this lady after the meeting because she said something I didn't like. You know what I mean? So I had to learn, what is the intent? What am I trying to get across? And what I'm trying to get across is the hope and the love in Alcoholics Anonymous, that no matter how many mistakes that we make, we can have our seat here if we deem it our seat, right? If I am a member, nobody can kick me out. I am a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And so here it says, I remind myself regularly to trust the inner resource of the well person inside and the outer resource of the group. The track record of others and my own history show me that I can get through whatever comes if I am patient to do what makes sense on a daily basis. And what makes sense for me is to make sure that I meditate. What makes sense to me is that I am one of those people that I do quiet time in the morning, and it is a function of the Oxford group. This is something that I do in order for me to stay sane, right? I can get caught up in my head about something, or somebody looks at me and I'm like, oh my God, she's thinking about me. Like, she ain't even thinking about me. But like, let my self-centered, person inside of me, I will think that you're thinking about me. So, all that to say, and I'm going to tell you guys a little story. So, in the book, it talks about like boy meets girl on AA campus, right? So, remember I told you what you judge, you become. So I used to sit back and, and I would see like, the people get together like, oh, okay, how much time do you got? Oh yeah, all right, where's your home group? And all that stuff, right? So, and I would be like, oh my God, these fools are crazy. And then, you see them get married, you see them have a kid, they buy the house, all of AA's going over to their housewarming party, all of that stuff. And then years later, like, these mofos is getting divorced, and then home groups are splitting up. Folks are, it's like they're set tripping, like, I don't talk to so-and-so, And so all of this stuff, right? And so I would sit back and I would be like, hell no, I don't crap where I lay my head, right? Like, this is my safe space, and wherever I go, like, I can do, like, business out there, right? And so, like, you end up on a committee and you end up being friends with people. And so I met this guy through his sponsor, because me and his sponsor were on this committee, and we were opening up a meeting up in Hunters Point in San Francisco, and like, we were doing all this stuff. And this guy was super cool, and he was like too cool for school. He was stoic, and he would just sit there, and and he got a CDC number, so like, that works well with me. CDC number is a prison number, and so that works well with me, because I tried dealing with square dudes and it just didn't work. And so, like, I should never give a man his street cred, right? Like, I was just like, no. And so, like, I embarked upon this friendship, and I had this friendship with this gentleman for 14 years. We sat on committees together, we did service work together, we would go to speaker meetings together, like, all of this stuff. And then, as I was getting older, and I couldn't have kids, and all of this stuff, and so one day I just cracked a joke, and I was like, hey man, like, if I turn 50 and I ain't married yet, like, I think you should just take care of me. And he was like, I will. I was like, hey, I gotta be a man, and so I was like, no, I don't think so. I don't think that's gonna work for me, because like, I don't want to mess it up, because I already know, like, I'm an acquired taste. You know what I mean? Like, I'm real sharp, and I can get wicked with the tongue. So it's like, I don't want to mess up like a good friendship. And he was like, no, why don't we just take it like we take the program, a day at a time? And I was like, okay. And so, 10 years later, we are together, and we got married November 1st of 2022. And so I've been married for over, 3 years. And what's so funny, let me tell you how the universe works. I was raised by my dad. He was a single father, raised his daughter. And so we have this beautiful blended family now, because my daughter, because I call her my daughter has 4 parents that are clean and sober. Her mother has 15 years, her stepfather has 19 years, my husband has 27, and I have 30. So we were able to raise her in Alcoholics Anonymous, and she lives by these principles. And so for this young kid that came in here full of anger and fear, stands before you because of Alcoholics Anonymous, as a direct result of, taking the steps and having a sponsor and having a higher power and having principles by which I live, I'm a woman of dignity, and I'm a woman of grace today. And I learned that I can tell people how I feel without cutting them down, because they have value. So thank you for my life, and thank you for 12-stepping me.